Hi everyone, this is our channel, Meet the Real Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
Hi, my name is Selena. I'm 19 years old, and I'm just crazy about basketball. I follow all the sports news, the star players, and the league statistics. I know the names of all the famous players around the world. My friends were amused by this because their interests ran more towards makeup, fashion, singers, and movie stars. I thought those girl things were just outright vain, shallow, frivolous, and downright silly to tell the truth. The college's basketball team coach was forced to take leave due to a chronic illness, leaving the team without a coach. Due to my high school reputation and widely recognized basketball expertise, I was asked if I wanted to serve as the basketball team's temporary coach. I had always dreamed of someday becoming a coach for a famous basketball team, so I jumped at the opportunity. School leagues presented opportunities for players to show what they've got and maybe get scouted by a professional league team. It was also my chance to start as a college basketball coach. By studying the opposing team's previous games, I analyzed their strategies and learned their strengths and weaknesses. I was able to excel and drive my team to an undefeated streak of winnings. We won the college league championship. I was selected to train a team in a professional league with another famous coach. It was an incredible opportunity for me to up my game a notch. During this time, I met an opposing team's coach named Jacob, who was something of a genius when it came to winning basketball strategies. He shared the same dreams as mine. He bragged that his team was better than mine. Well, I couldn't ignore the gauntlet he threw at my feet, so I challenged him to a game. My team against his, in the upcoming season, and may the best team win. If my team won, he would acknowledge me as a superior coach, and vice versa. The season began, and both our teams began beating all our opponents. I used these victories to hone my coaching skills to the next level. Both our teams were undefeated until the day we were to face each other in a championship game. The game began, and both teams played hard. We stayed closely matched the entire game. In the final few seconds of play, one of their players got past our defense. He scored a buzzer beat. I was crushed and began to cry, but my team's fans in the stadium broke into a loud applause. They began chanting my name, acknowledging that I have given them a great competitive, entertaining game. Jacob came over to me. I figured he came to gloat, but instead, he got down on one knee and presented me with an engagement ring. I was in shock. The stadium cheered even louder. I may have lost the game that day, but for some reason, I felt like a winner. He was a dream, the future, or so I thought. But my love was cursed right from the start. Sounds a bit confusing, right? Let me explain. But first, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Carolyn. I was a dreamer. I dreamed of a good, warm, stable, successful life. I wanted a good job. And I wanted to travel around the world a bit with Helen. She was my best friend. We virtually shared the same dreams, and hobbies, and interests, and lifestyles. We've been friends since we were kids. People often thought that we were sisters. I did too, in fact. She even got jealous if anyone tried to get close to me. Every day, Helen and I worked a little more towards our dreams. Once, when Helen and I were traveling with some of our friends, we had a problem with the hostess on the plane. A gentleman intervened and cleverly solved our problems. His name was Danny. I liked him. A lot. I thought about him often. But whenever I talked to Helen about him, she told me that he was not as amazing as I seemed to think he was. Coincidentally, I met him again at a party of a mutual friend. We talked together till daylight. I told Helen about our encounter, and she expressed her wishes that my love story would have a happy ending. I similarly told her that I hoped she would find the love of her life someday too. Everything would be okay, we figured. Then, one day, I received a letter in our mailbox. It was in weird handwriting, as if the writer had written it with a trembling hand. I opened it curiously. It said that my love for Danny would become a curse if I didn't give him up and get him out of my life. What nonsense, I thought. Whose idea of a silly joke was this? I immediately called Danny and Helen to tell them about the letter. Danny laughed, but Helen was worried and suggested that I should be careful from now on. That same day, Danny had a horrible car accident, but fortunately he wasn't hurt. A detective investigating the case determined that his car brakes had been tampered with. In another incident, A car almost hit me, but it swerved away at the last minute. When I mentioned this incident to Danny, he tried to calm me down and told me to just forget about it. He gave me a beautiful bracelet as a present and proposed. We got engaged, and I couldn't have been happier. I wanted to show the bracelet to Helen, but somehow I seemed to have lost it. I couldn't find it anywhere. Anyway, when I told Helen about his proposal, she was thrilled for me. I spent days shopping for just the right wedding dress. I was so busy with preparations that I forgot all about the ominous letter. I went to the wedding hall early to make sure that everything was ready and prepared. Helen was helping me, and Danny kept calling me to make sure I was all right. Suddenly, the lights went out. I called out to Helen, worried that she might have tripped and fallen when the lights were out. When the lights came back on, Helen had fainted, and my dress had disappeared. I screamed to the ceiling, "What do you want from me? Leave me alone!" Suddenly, Danny appeared out of nowhere and asked me what had happened. I told him then and there that we must break off our engagement, otherwise the curse the letter mentioned might injure someone or cause someone to die. Then Helen came to and tried to calm me down. She told me to go to the car and that she would get our stuff and follow me. I loved Danny and wanted to marry him, but now I was seriously worried that this curse threat might actually be real. Helen came back carrying a bag and a large suitcase and told Danny not to worry, that she would drive me home and then call him to tell him that we had arrived safely. I was still crying, and Helen was trying to calm me down. When we arrived home, I noticed something strange. Helen was carrying a bag that was partially open, and I glimpsed a piece of clothing stuffed into it. It looked exactly like my dress. I opened the bag and found that it was my dress. I confronted Helen and demanded to know how my missing dress ended up in her bag. I clearly caught her red-handed, and she was unable to answer coherently. I realized at that moment that the source of the so-called curse was Helen. "Helen," I said, "how dare you do this to me? I thought we were like sisters to each other." She replied icily, with a glare that I saw for the first time. She said that she fell in love with Danny just as I did, but he chose me instead of her, and that she hated me for it. She said she won him over and got him to love her instead. Then they both tried to scare me into calling off the wedding so that she and Danny could be together. There are no words to describe how I felt at the time. I replied in a similar tone. I told her that I don't ever want to see her again, or Danny. Neither of them mattered anymore. I never did see Helen or Danny after that day. I'm on a Caribbean island now, sipping on a cocktail. I read in the paper that Danny and Helen had announced their engagement. I'm thinking about what wedding present I should give them as a surprise. Every one of us has a talent. It may be singing beautifully, drawing artistically, writing poetically. We're all different. Our special talents make us happy. We are all unique in our own way, living in a world full of peace, love, and happiness. But what if our talent became our bane? Well, my talent did become my bane. Let me tell you how. My name is Jenny, and I'm 16 years old. I lived in a quiet neighborhood with my parents and my little brother Matthew. I didn't have a lot of friends or hobbies. I was only interested in social media, but I always had a feeling that I had something unique, something that distinguished me from others. Turned out I was right. It all started on my grandmother's birthday. My family and I were traveling to her home to celebrate the occasion. The road was narrow and bumpy, with a rocky shoulder on one side and a river on the other. Dad was driving too fast, so obviously, Mom was a bit worried. Conversely, Matthew was excited. It was raining so hard that day that Dad feared the weather might get even worse, so he was driving faster than he should have, to try to arrive at Grandma's house quickly. I was worried too, but for a slightly different reason. I had a feeling of impending doom on that trip. The rain got progressively worse. There was almost continuous lightning and thunder. Suddenly, we saw a big truck that had stopped on the road ahead of us. Mom screamed. Dad swerved to avoid hitting the truck and lost control of the car, which had gone on one of its sides and off the road into the river. It was the most frightening situation I had ever experienced in my whole life. We went underwater, and I felt as if we were in an aquarium. Dad was unconscious, and his forehead was bleeding. Mom was struggling, and Matthew was paralyzed with fear, his eyes tightly shut. Then, my vision went dark. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital bed, with a team of doctors around me. When I asked them about my family, the look on their faces told me that I was the sole survivor of that horrible accident. Several days had passed since the accident. I was having trouble sleeping. The doctors gave me some sleeping pills. They even tried hypnosis to help me sleep. Grandma came to visit me. She was very sad. She said I could come live with her. My whole life was turned upside down in an instant. A police officer at the hospital was kind enough to drive Grandma and I to our home. After he dropped us off, something strange happened. In a fraction of a second, I had a vision, a momentary premonition that something bad was going to happen to him. I saw him trying to catch a thief, and suddenly crashing into another car. So I thanked him for the ride, and told him to take care of himself, to be very careful. He smiled, and said that he will. The very next day, as I was watching the news, I saw a report that that very same kind officer had died in a car crash, just like my premonition. Grandma was upset when I told her what had happened. I didn't tell her that I had foreseen his death, because I knew that she wouldn't believe me. In fact, she might have even thought I was crazy. This strange turn of events happened again, with one of our neighbors, who visited us one day. She was a kind, lovely woman. I had a premonition that she would die in her kitchen due to a gas line explosion. I urged her to be careful with the cooking gas, because it could be so dangerous. But she just laughed and said that she loved cooking, and that there's nothing to fear. Grandma got a bit upset with me for making a big deal out of nothing. She said that I was just a little paranoid due to the accident, and that my imagination was getting way too overactive, and that I shouldn't try to scare people. Needless to say, the neighbor that I had warned did indeed die in a gas line explosion 4 days later. Coincidence? I think not. Am I somehow causing these incidents to happen? I couldn't help but think that I was somehow linked to the whole thing. I searched the internet for any information about this phenomena, and I found that it was common in people who had been involved in a traumatic experience, especially almost drowning incidents. I read a research that said that parts of the subject's brain would become very active. After our neighbor's accident, my aunt and uncle came to visit us. I had missed them a lot, but yet again, I had a premonition that they would have an accident going home, causing their car to explode and crash into the river. 2 days later, they were preparing to leave and head home. I begged them to stay one more night, but they said that they couldn't because they had work the next day. I told Grandma about my premonition, and she scolded me, told me to stop this nonsense. She thought it was my overactive imagination again. My uncle came in as Grandma was scolding me and asked me what was wrong. I wanted to say, "Nothing important, Uncle. Just premonitions of doom, that's all." But I didn't. I went to sleep instead and had a dream that Uncle was going to get run over by a car. Suddenly, I woke up to the sound of Uncle and Grandma's voices. They were talking about me, and it was raining outside. Uncle stood up and said that he had to get something from his car. I sat up straight and shouted, "No, don't go." Uncle said, "Jenny, it'll be fine. I'll just get something from the car." I couldn't dissuade him from going, so I followed him out. Uncle went out to his car and was standing by its door, which was facing the road. Then I saw the headlights. A car was coming down the road, driving towards us. I saw the car hit a flooded spot on the road and suddenly began sliding sideways, right towards Uncle. Instinctively, I made a decision to try and protect him. I had to at least try. I jumped in front of the swerving car. The driver saw me and tried to regain control. Suddenly, I felt a warm sunshine mysteriously coming down from the sky amidst the rain, and I felt calm and safe. And I had one final premonition before everything went dark.